Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for Concert Conversations. Although we may have made some changes to our Quad City Symphony Orchestra season, one of the things we're committed to is engaging you, our audience member, with the amazing, talented resources we have in our symphony. Today is no exception to that. As we think about Ludwig van Beethoven and Johann Sebastian Bach, we'll be aided in our consideration not only by our music director, Maestro Mark Russell Smith, for whom we're very grateful that he's joining us today, but also a very special treat, soloist for the opening work on this program, Marian Lee. And we'll be chatting with both during the course of the next few minutes. We hope you'll join us, and we thank Chris Connolly with Wells Fargo Advisors for making this series possible. Well, Maestro, if I may, I'm going to start with you, and we're going to talk a little bit about this wonderful celebration you've given us of Beethoven. And we've really had a lot of fun. But we've talked before about some of the strictures in a quarantine season when we have to reduce the size of ensembles, that sort of thing. Were those some of the factors that led you to Eroica? Because, I mean, it really stands on its own, regardless of any other outside influence.
For sure. Yes and no. I mean, Eroica is such a groundbreaking work and such, I mean, it's really a pivot point for Beethoven. And so in that sense, I mean, we have certain limitations, just size of orchestra wise, and certain limitations that COVID has brought us. And I mean, not unlike Beethoven, I mean, thinking about, or just Beethoven existing in the quote unquote classical world where, symphonies and the certain formulas and forms and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the point of Eroica is that Beethoven embraces those, but also just like throws the shackles off. And so all bets are off, and codas all of a sudden get bigger than development sections, and the expression inherent in it just grows exponentially. And so, given while still maintaining a relatively small orchestra, I mean it's still a quote unquote classical size orchestra, Beethoven just like really pushes the limit of everything in Eroica. And so that's kind of what I wanted to show with this, and also have a big symphonic statement. I mean, we weren't able to do the Ninth Symphony for obvious reasons. And the Eroica is a big symphonic statement, to put it mildly. And what makes it even more extraordinary is where it comes: 1805, 1804, 1805. Compared to everything else that was going on around Beethoven's time, and certainly compared to the first and second symphonies of Beethoven, it's just a huge thing. And so to be able to show that, and to be able to show that side of Beethoven, and to show the evolution and revolutionary Beethoven in this context was, I mean, Eroica is pretty much the one and only choice.
Well, we're going to dig more deeply into that in just a moment, but I wanted to offer that as the sort of setup with, if you're going to have that work, what was the thought process into selecting that which would complement it? In other words, the opening work on the program, this keyboard concerto of Johann Sebastian Bach.
Well, I mean, as usual, there are many factors in play. One of them is timing and scope. I think it's always wonderful to honor our local musical community, and Marian has sold with us in the past, hugely successfully, and so the opportunity to have a solo piece, but also one that, to be honest, just isn't too long. You know what I mean? It's important, given the vast, well, just the number of minutes of Eroica, and the amount of time that we can be on stage, healthfully. And, I mean, these things play a role. So how to get, how to have a wonderful soloist and a solo opportunity, but also fit it in with a program where there's a gigantic symphony on there and there's no intermission. I mean, that also, played a role. So Bach and Beethoven, of course, comment beautifully on each other. Marian comments beautifully on whatever she plays. And, so it was just kind of a natural fit to have this Bach keyboard concerto. Again, something that we wouldn't do in normal circumstances, what I mean, but everything's a little weird now. And so, we have the opportunity to have. Did you lose me for a minute there?
No, no.
No, good. Okay. It said my internet was unstable. But anyway, to have the opportunity to explore these works that we normally wouldn't get to is one of the kind of silver linings of this whole strange situation.
Well, we're going to bring Marian into the conversation right now, and it is such a gift to have you join us again. You've been a part of our concert conversations in the past, and it's great to have you here again. Marian, for those who are checking in on concert conversations, because remember, we are not at the Adler. Of course, I'm at the Thomaskirche. That's the background I downloaded for today. But we could be having viewers from all over the world joining us. So it might be good to start with, tell us a little bit about yourself, your professional calling in the Quad Cities, and I'll just be a little spoiler here, maybe also a little bit about how music came into your life as a calling. So that's an awful lot to unpack, but I know you can do it, Marian.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. I'll try to be efficient. Well, let's see. This is my ninth year here in the Quad Cities. So I'm almost an official Quad citizen, I think. I don't know how many years it takes, but I teach at St. Ambrose University, and that's the reason I came. Before I came from Delaware and then taught at the University of Delaware. And, being back in the Midwest has been awesome. That's where I grew up. I was born in Minneapolis. I don't know if Mark knew that, but
I did not know that.
County, yes, and lived in Boston and New York. Following my dad's career, and then I basically grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and Ann Arbor, Michigan, Big Ten towns, college towns, and I ended up going to school in New York City and get my degrees there at Juilliard, and I even lived abroad in Russia, in Moscow Conservatory. And so these were all very formative times for me, and I'm so grateful that I had this exposure. And my musical influences really came from my father's background. My grandfather was a very famous tenor. He's considered the first operatic tenor. He's credited with having brought Western opera to South Korea at the time. So, I kind of have a proud heritage of that and come from a family of musicians. So it was kind of natural that I migrated to being a musician myself. And what were your other questions?
No, that's wonderful. I'm just going to pick on that a little bit because it's fascinating. I have to say I must have misplaced in my mind about the Moscow Conservatory. I'm just curious as to what was your age or stage of development, and what are your recollections of that? That sounds fascinating.
Oh, I arrived at the most fascinating time. I arrived 1 week before Gorbachev was kidnapped by, and there was a failed coup d'etat. Luckily, it was a failed coup d'etat. And so, I was coming over as a Fulbright scholar. And so you can imagine it was just utter chaos. Went to the embassy to say, what should we do? And they're like, it's your choice. And so I had waited so long to arrive in Moscow that unless they shipped me back on their own dime, I was gonna stay, And it was 3 glorious years there. It was hard. It was like the Wild Wild West at the time. They're trying to find their foothold in democracy, and there's a lot of resistance, and it was crazy. There was a little civil war that broke out. I mean, I witnessed it all, and it was an amazing time, and it was also an amazing time to experience being in the conservatory where Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff and Scriabin were pianists, and seeing their names, and just it's amazing to be surrounded in that history, and going to school, going to classrooms where they taught and practiced, and phenomenal.
That is fantastic. Now, and I could talk much more about this, and maybe sometime we'll have a chance over coffee to talk more about it. But I want to stick with Bach here while we've got you and Maestro. Uh, there's a reason we call this a concerto for keyboard, because we don't. I mean, if you call it a piano concerto, people might have an image. The piano concerto, as we think of, especially in the context of, say, Beethoven, that simply didn't exist at the time that Bach was doing this. So let's talk a little bit about the different consideration when you're playing a Bach keyboard concerto versus maybe a 19th century romantic, full-blown piano concerto. And I'd leave that open to let either of you take the first swack at it.
Well, I'll tell you, the keyboard was, I mean, there's so many options there. I mean, we know that, of course, Bach played the harpsichord. And one of the things that when you interpret Baroque music now is there's always a continuo instrument, which means, some kind of keyboard or a theorbo or some kind of chordal instrument that is expected and that certainly was played during that time. So figuring what that is really impossible, because for the St. Matthew Passion, he used organ and he used harpsichord, and there are records of all sorts of, there are all sorts of things that back up the assertion that Bach basically used whatever keyboard was around, exclusively, because it was very practical. He loved the why can't I think of it, Marian? It's the little soft keyboard. What's it
called? Not a clavichord or
clavichord. Mm-hmm. I mean, he loved the clavichord, which is a different kind of sound. We know that was kind of his personal favorite instrument. The piano wasn't even happening or just starting, the piano forte piano. So, the big question is, what do you play it on? And a harpsichord is a soft instrument and it doesn't project. And, we have a big hall. I mean, there are just all sorts of factors now. We have modern instruments with steel strings instead of gut strings. The bows are different. I mean, everything's different now. And so the fundamental question is, what do you play it on? And when Marian and I talked about it, it's like, that's pretty much the first question, what are we playing it on? And so when you play it on the piano, which I think is extremely appropriate for a lot of reasons, then there are a lot of considerations that you have to, that come to the fore. And maybe Marian wants to talk about that. I mean, how you adjust your touch, how you adjust the pedaling. I mean, it's clear that it's a Baroque thing. And so certainly there is something to be learned from the harpsichord and the harpsichord action, but a piano is also not a harpsichord. So you can't, anyway, so Marian, why don't you take it?
Yeah. So, the Bach concertos are definitely the credited with being the first concertos for a keyboard or piano instrument. And so it's very interesting because, like Mark mentioned, the harpsichord was a continuo and kind of filled out the harmony in a string ensemble usually. But in this case, it serves both purposes. It does still stay as part of the ensemble in the 2D section. So, and then there are the solo breakout moments. And so I don't really get a break like I do in a Mozart or Beethoven or a big romantic concerto where the orchestra has their thing and then you can take a break and then you have your solo and then they play and so it's a continuous thing for me. I play all the way throughout the 10 minutes. It's actually a lot of fun because in a way it really does feel like true chamber music. There are challenges because there are different scores with different ornamentations, and so you have to, in fact, we've been talking a lot about that, what do we follow, or that it was a period of improvisation, so we're not really held or bound to anything because the actual scores, autograph scores, really don't have dynamics written in, and there's a lot of freedom in that. So in a way, the freedom's great because you can sort of do what you want. There is no wrong, but then almost too much freedom is like, well, but what do we do, and what do we follow? Because there are different editions with different notes. And so that's sort of a decision that, you know, we have to make together. And then my solo things I have to decide on my own, you know, what's going to be the most effective. And there's even like a little spot for cadenza, but it's not a traditional cadenza. It would be too much, you know, it's not in the style. So, you know, do I do something or do I not? And so I'm going to do a little something, but not overdo it, because you do need to always stay within the style of that period.
Well, that's what I find so intriguing about this. So for lay persons like me, just a little illustration here, the harpsichord doesn't really allow for playing really loud and really soft. It's always going to be about the same thing. Whereas this new development on the scene, the pianoforte, he actually, I think if I get this right, he got a chance to try this when he went and made that visit to the court in Prussia to, oh, who was the flutist king there?
Frederick.
Yeah, Frederick II, Frederick the Great, right? And I think the story is that Frederick the Great said, "Hey, we just got this. You want to try messing around with it?" And it was the difference. And imagine if you had, anything where you had no control over volume, and then suddenly you had this amazing control. So that's what I wanted to ask you, Marian, is I trust your instincts, but I mean, how do you listen to those instincts and saying, this is what would be both appropriate and appealing based on the amount of conjecture we have to have about what was this fella Bach doing with a brand new invention like the pianoforte?
Well, you know, by all accounts, you know, I mean, the harpsichord was at its zenith, you know, by that time. And so it's kind of like, you know, what's a top car? You know, it's like playing a BMW, you know, and then you've got like this, you know, brand new car, maybe the earliest model of a Tesla, which, you know, hasn't worked out all its kinks yet. And so I think that's why most likely it was played, you know, for the harpsichord. And it's probably why Bach, even though he was aware and tried the Silverman pianos, it was not his first choice. You know what I mean? Why? Yeah. So, but you know, there's no denying that what we have now is a far superior instrument. There's just no denying it. But you know, every pianist grows up with playing Bach, you know, from yay high. So we are from when we're little, you know, understand these ornamentations and the style of playing. And granted, it's gone through a lot of controversy and how the touch of playing Bach, and, you know, is it more like Glenn Gould's? There was a period where Glenn Gould's, you know, style was but before that was very romantic, extremely romantic, with lots of pedal and things like that. So, you know, it's, you know, ultimately, you know, you have to do your research and do what you feel is right. And so that's what I'm doing.
And Maestro, I think you had an observation there too.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is all about style. And, you know, with a harpsichord, I mean, you can do dynamics just based on like how many, you know, if you do a couple things, you double things and stuff, but it's block dynamics. And so the idea of like stress and release, if you have an appoggiatura, which means you lean on one note and then you back off the other note. I mean, that's a fundamental thing in music, you know, the strong, weak. And on harpsichord, you can't do that. I mean, it's like, it's plucked, right? So every articulation is the same. And so the function of ornamentation is to provide strength. So it's like strong, weak, you ornament the strong and then you don't ornament the weak. And so because you can't do like, you have to do, you know, and so now that we have the pianos can do that. You can, you know, it's touch sensitive. And so you can do strong, weak. And so ornamentation now takes, you know, that was the role of ornamentation, is to make something strong or to draw attention to, you know, it's something you keep in mind, but it's also something that now, because we have strong, weak, and we have touch sensitive instrument, that it's, you know, it takes on a different role. It's, you know, it's it's all about style, and style means tempo, and style means touch, and style means how much vibrato you use if you're a string player, and what kind of, how staccato you are, how you articulate as a pianist. I mean, and so, we're playing contemporary instruments. We're playing instruments with steel strings and not gut strings, and we're playing bows that are different, and we're playing a piano instead of a harpsichord. So all that informs how we approach it and how we play it, because if you're playing Baroque instruments and you're playing a harpsichord, there's a certain lightness and there's a certain, articulation and kind of, bubbliness, I guess, of the texture that just kind of naturally emanates. And so it's easy to let that go if you're not really careful and really work at it with modern instruments. So there are just all sorts of things you have to consider when you talk about Baroque style, or any style, frankly.
Yeah,
well,
and my challenge is that because there is that plucking sound of the harpsichord, and obviously I can't play everything totally staccato, but there is some kind of special touch that is very Bach, and that I plan on using. And it would be, even though the piano has the capability of playing loud and soft, and everything in between, without, if I were to play with no ornamentation, that would just not sound right.
Right.
It
No,
would not sound like Bach.
right. And I'm not saying don't ornament. I'm just saying that the function, I mean, the reason why it's ornamented like it is because of
Right.
the keyboard for which it was written, And so now we have to take it and use it. I mean, there should be tons of ornamentation, I think, and that's what we're doing, So, and again, Bach didn't write any of this. It's just some, this edition says that edition says that, and Bach was writing stuff so fast, and he was writing for himself to perform it. So it's like, you just leave it out,
Yeah. Well, and I wish I can't believe we're 20 minutes into this program and we've barely we've touched Beethoven at all. I don't think he would like playing second fiddle ever in any setting. But I am very grateful to have you with us, Marian. I want you to stick around with us. One thought, though, is I always try to weave in a little bit of biography. On a couple of occasions, Bach walked more than 200 miles for the opportunity to play an instrument. I mean, in both cases, they were organs. Right. And I'm wondering, have you ever thought how far you would walk to play a particular instrument?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, exercise is not my forte.
No, come on, lie to us. We're on court.
We're not minded COVID in the sense that I get to stay home all the time.
Well, but in this age of social distancing, we'll just assume you're walking like the rest of us. We're all so physically fit. But anyway, I just wanted to work that in there. The other thing is, I'm fascinated by his coincidence with George Friedrich Handel. They were born about a month apart from each other. They met only once when Bach's reputation was, he was very well known in the region, and Handel was coming back from a trip from his first long stay in England. And they didn't really hit it off very well. But one thing in common is, on one of those walks, he went to Lübeck to play where the great composer up there, it starts with a D. B, Buxtehude, not D, Buxtehude. And the reason they both left was because they both realized if they stayed much longer, they had to marry Buxtehude's 41-year-old daughter. And so they were each 18 at that time, and they got out of there. So walking has its own motivations. So please stick with us, Marian, if you wish. But we're going to turn things over to Ludwig van Beethoven now. So what I find among the many things that are so amazing about this work, Maestro, is that, as you indicated earlier, he's really starting to get bigger and bigger in terms of expressing ideas. And this was an idea that was kind of, it was ill-born, because at first he thought he was making a tribute to Bonaparte. Right. And then, before it had actually been thoroughly published, we have this from his secretary at the time, who had written that when he was informed that Bonaparte had declared himself emperor, Beethoven said, "So he is no more than a common mortal. Now, too, he will tread underfoot all the rights of man and indulge only his ambition." He took the title page, ripped it in half, and then threw it away because he had written to Bonaparte. And then they had to have that copied to make it just an heroic symphony. So what are the heroic aspects that we as audience members can discern in this work?
Well, I mean, the second movement is a funeral march, and it's in memoriam. I mean, it's a tribute to. I mean, originally, as you said, Bonaparte, but then, Beethoven and his idealism, canceled that, so it made it just to, like, kind of the unknown soldier or the unknown hero. So we have a incredibly expressive funeral march that just packs an emotional wallop. I mean, we have the gestures, we have like like the rolling drums, we have the gestures in the cellos and the basses, and the march rhythms, dim, dum, and kind of rhythms. So that's a big part of it. The outer movements are just gigantically proportioned now. If that's if I mean, that's heroic in a certain way, I guess. I mean, what Beethoven does structurally, is just pushing the envelope, as I alluded to earlier. The coda, the end. We have the structure, the sonata allegro form of the first theme, the second theme, and development, and so I mean, that's all dramatic. I mean, the drama in the development, and what he does with the kind of cells of music that he uses is incredible and intense, and the way the keys work and all that, that's very technical speaking, but just from once we arrive at what should be the ending, like bum bum, thumb, bum bum, it's like extended like hugely. So all of a sudden, it used to be kind of like this, and now it's like this and this, and so things are just extended, and ideas are riffed upon, and so the kind of just the massiveness of the structure, kind of leaves you, like, after the first movement, just like, wow, like, wiping your brow. And then you go to the funeral march, which is, has a fugue, it has, all sorts of devices, compositional devices that were really common, but the intensity of it, and the way he uses dissonance, and this is all very new. And so one thing that I always say is, we have to really understand this, and to be shocked by it, like we should be, we have to put ourselves in the ears of 1806, 1805, 1806, understanding what else was going on. And then, to us now, now that we've lived through Tchaikovsky and Stravinsky and everything, it's, it doesn't sound so shocking to our ears, but it absolutely is shocking. And what he does with this kind of this dumb little theme and variations, in the fourth movement, the way he plays around with it, and starting with the bass line instead of the melody. I mean, just these kind of taking the forms that exist, and just like breaking all the rules, and breaking, kind of the boundaries there. I mean, that's what this is all about, and really points us to where he goes with basically the rest of his, artistic life.
Well, we're getting very close to time here, and I can't believe how quickly this has gone by. But I'm just wondering, Maestro, if there's certain things you want us to be listening for, because it strikes me that we're going to be enjoying this concert remotely. We audience members will be at home, but that does create certain advantages, because even though there's nothing like being in the Adler or Centennial Hall live and feeling the music that way, there is a quietude to this, mingled with the live performance, that I think creates its own opportunity and energy. Is there anything you would have us especially listen for in either of these works?
Well, look, I mean, what Beethoven is about is figuring out a way to finally now express the inexpressible, and so Mozart did that. But Mozart was like a perfecter and not an innovator. And so Mozart, in the operas, in the piano concerti, I mean, plumbs the depths, but in a different way. And now here's Beethoven, making a statement. And like, Mozart wasn't, I don't believe, trying to make a statement. But now Beethoven is, I mean, the whole aesthetic of the artist making a comment, or making something for the future, and not just to put food on the table. It's taking a stand on something, and expressing something. I mean, and he was taking a stand on what he thought was Bonaparte and freedom and heroism. and then, you know, took a stand in a different way because Bonaparte was who he was. And so the idea of trying to express these kind of inexpressible things in music, and I mean, that's why this just couldn't contain him. The orchestra and the forms, just, it couldn't contain everything he had to say. And so these outbursts, I mean, it's a big emotional symphony, and that, you know, these big outbursts and these big moments, it's just, you know, it's just full of them. And so, like, you should be exhausted at the end. For sure, I will be. The orchestra will be, you know. So it's really kind of seeing those moments and putting it in context and just living and letting the work, you know, work its visceral magic. You know, I mean, it's a visceral, gutsy, you know, it's a really gutsy piece.
Well, I want to thank you both and just leave you with one final little note. The two stories connect again. There's this myth that Bach was completely forgotten until Mendelssohn came along. But of course, he was well known and regarded. What was very strange is, especially considering how many kids he and his wife had, the Bach line petered out within 2 generations. And one of the last of his own children to be living, Susanna, was discovered by 1800 to be nearing starvation from poverty. And it was a benefit that Beethoven arranged that created a little bit of money for her. So she had some, just a little bit of money to live her last years without facing starvation. And to me, that says that, you know, all flesh is frail and corruptible, but the legacies that musicians have made, like Bach, like Beethoven, like the two of you in gifting us with your incredible talents, these are enduring. And I just, on behalf of all of those of us who consider ourselves fans of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, I want to express their and my thanks to both of you, Marian Lee, our keyboard soloist for the Bach piece, and of course, the music director of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, Mark Russell Smith. A final word of thanks to Chris Connolly and Wells Fargo Advisors. And remember, you have to visit qcso.org so you can gain access to all of the works on this Masterworks season. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you join me in thanking our guests, whom I thank once again, and thanks to all for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.